come on up. Please sign in, state your name for the record, sir.
Good evening. I am signed in. My name is John Yakim. I am a resident of Monroeville. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Mr. Little, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I was not able to attend last week's budget workshop, but I did watch it with some interest. And one of the things that I think we need to look at as a community is when we're asking the taxpayers to pay for certain services, that we differentiate between essential services and non-essential services, which I believe Mr. Silka 2 years ago tried to draw that distinction in the budget process. There are certain components of our municipality that must be funded based on mandates from the state of Pennsylvania. Police, fire, zoning, hearing, those types of services. Then there's services that have a very broad base of use, things like the library, the park system, where a lot of taxpayers, a lot of different taxpayers are taking advantages of those particular services. When you start getting into services that have a much more narrow base, like the individual programs within the park system, the senior center itself, while the municipality should be paying for the infrastructure, the use of some of the more specific programs probably should ultimately be paid for by the users themselves. For instance, 2 years ago, and I don't have this year's current numbers, 2 years ago, it cost a municipality, based on the budget, approximately $200 per senior for the senior center to operate. But yet, when we invited guests from other communities to use our system, according to the numbers that I saw, we only charged out-of-town seniors $5 for the use of that service. Well, one could argue the value of the senior center to the taxpayers of Monroeville and to the seniors of Monroeville. I don't think it's responsible or fair to expect the taxpayers of Monroeville to pay for a resident of Penn Hills or Plum to use our system. Last month, the animal control officer spoke, and actually I thought he did a very nice job. I initially was on the side that said maybe we should do without animal control. Maybe we should outsource that service. But he did make a credible argument for the existence of his position. But I heard over and over again the members of council talking about trying to control the overtime. Mr. Duncan, I think you made a big deal about the control of the overtime, and I agree with that. And it sounds like a lot of the overtime is in the second shift, and a lot of the overtime is also on Saturdays and Sundays. And he made the argument that since there's animals inside the shelter, that we need to provide for supervision over the course of the long weekends. I agree. In the private sector, when we have a shift that needs to be covered, we bring in a second shift. So what I'm proposing or suggesting to the municipality is that they bid a position that is a second shift that includes Saturday and Sundays for the public works person. That person could cover the animal control on Saturday and Sunday, and I'm sure there are things within a municipality that could be done, probably done more efficiently during the weekend. Cleanup in the parks, cleanup of buildings, all these things could be happening on Saturday and Sunday, and that would eliminate the need for the overtime. There were some questions about the fire department, and I thought some of them were interesting. I got the impression, Mr. Mayor, that the calendar idea is off the table.
Apparently it is.
Okay, it was kind of alluded to last week. I'm glad to see that. I don't think our police departments, our fire departments, our municipal taxpayers' equipment should be used in that kind of a scandalous way. Private organization can certainly do what they want, but the taxpayers' equipment certainly shouldn't be part of that. The idea of billing taxpayers for fire department services came up, and I thought that was an interesting idea. But when you bill an insurance company, ultimately we as the taxpayers are paying for it through increased premiums. We send our emergency vehicles frequently out of town. We are frequently within the first or second response of out-of-town calls, whether it be for EMS or fire protection. While I certainly do not begrudge a community calling us when there's an emergency, if we are part of their standard response, then it certainly seems fair to the taxpayers of Monroeville that the cost of those services be shared by those communities. And I'm not referring to our immediate neighbor of Pitcairn. I think that's a special circumstance because of the relationship through the school district and the long-standing relationship. But we're sending 2 and 3 units on routine fire calls to Duquesne, Pennsylvania. We should be receiving some kind of compensation from the township of, or from the city of Duquesne. 2 meetings ago, there was a discussion on the police department and the promotion of supervisors. I am curious, and maybe Mr. Little can answer this question, why were more corporals not hired by the police department? It seems that in the past, there have been 9 supervisors, 3 per shift, which help mitigate a lot of the overtime, and we're not anywhere close to that right now.
I'll refer that to Chief Cole. I'll refer that to Chief Cole after you're done with your questions, John.
Okay. The second question I have is, I believe it was Councilman Harvey, but I could be mistaken, Ron, asked if the promotions from sergeants, from corporals to sergeants and lieutenants would alleviate overtime. And it was kind of left with the impression that some folks here felt that promoting corporals to sergeants and lieutenants would alleviate overtime. And I don't believe that to be the case. All we're going to do is have a more expensive supervisor. Now, I don't question the need that we should have sergeants and lieutenants. There should be a very visible chain of command. But promoting sergeants and corporals to sergeants and lieutenants costs the taxpayers money. It doesn't relieve 1 minute of overtime. I am curious, Mr. Mayor, again, maybe Mr. Little can answer this. We lost 2 significant revenue streams from last year, apparently. The hospital dispatch and the use of the hospital using the training center. Can you comment on that? How we lost those, why we lost those?
Well, we did, yeah, we did, but there is discussion about bringing that back, and again, Chief Cole could probably extrapolate a little bit better than I can on that, because he's closer to the situation than myself.
Okay. 2 years ago, during the audit process, there was 2 issues that were brought up by the auditor, and I'm curious if we have mechanisms now in place to help control those revenues. The first one was the police overtime that was underbilled and, to the best of my knowledge, never billed to the various out agencies, federal and state agencies, for our detective overtime. Is there a management system in place now to make sure that when we are using our officers for task forces, that overtime is being appropriately billed?
As far as I'm concerned, John, it's being billed out. That's the first I've heard of that
Okay,
it
well,
wasn't.
if you look at the management letter, which would have been in 2013, so it would have been in 2012, there were several $1,000s pointed out of unbilled overtime. I know it because I saw the documentation, and if you don't have it, if you can't find it, I certainly can provide it to you.
I'm sure we have it.
There's documentation that shows that this overtime was underbilled, specifically the detective force, but I don't know if it extends beyond that.
Well, again, there's 3 questions I can refer to Chief Cole after you're done.
Okay.
Okay?
The last question also came up in the management letter, and that was the theft and/or underbilling of scrap metal from Public Works. There was Public Works accumulate scrap metals during the course of their operations. And what was happening was, according to the management letter, this was being sold by individuals over there for their personal gain, as opposed to being sold and recouped back into the municipal coffers. Mr. Lowley maybe can touch on that.
Well, you used the word theft.
Well, if you don't own it and you take the money from the sale of it, I think that's theft. but correct me if I'm wrong there.
Well, yeah, I don't want to embellish any terms here, but.
Okay,
my
well, it was
understa-
taxpayers' scrap metal that was sold, and where's the money going to now?
Okay, my understanding on that, okay, is that that money was used for a Christmas party that the Public Works Department put on
So the taxpayers pay for municipal employees' parties?
for scrap metal. That is wherever the scrap metal comes from.
The scrap metal comes from our signs.
I mean, I don't know
From
where,
garbage
John,
pickup?
I don't know
No.
where. this-
Garbage
no.
pickup?
No, there should be, if they change a stop sign, the old stop sign becomes scrap metal and it's being sold for scrap. It was being sent to a scrapper using municipal vehicles, using municipal employees, and then that money was not turned back into the municipality. So even if it's being used for Christmas party, it still should go through our treasury.
Well, there's no question about that should be put into a separate kitty. Now, I wasn't here last year, and as far as you're talking about, as far as the money was not being accounted for in its proper procedure, and there was a theft, I'm not aware of that. Let me answer your question, John, okay? Now, it's a policy of this council, as it was a policy with the previous council, whether or not the money used, a good example on your part, but Mike Adams, I don't know if Mike's here tonight, if Mike Adams can say, okay, I don't know personally where the scrap comes from, but your example, as far as a stop sign, for instance, a used stop sign, all right, good example.
Use brake drums.
Used brake drums, okay, another good example. And all this is scrap.
Right.
Okay, and you are correct. Somewhere down the line, obviously, taxpayers paid for that.
Correct.
Unquestionably.
Correct.
Now, if this council makes a policy decision, no, that money cannot be used for the Public Works Christmas party, then it's not. If they make a policy decision that it is, then it is,
Can I interrupt real quick?
okay?
Last year, I know all the monies from the scrap went back to the municipality because I worked real hard to get money donated for that Christmas party.
Well, I actually did a right-to-know request on the receipts for that, and I recall only getting one receipt, and I believe it was for batteries, but I could be mistaken.
That I can't answer.
You know, if you drive around, every handyman in America now is a scrapper because of the value of metals. Obviously, the stop sign example that I used with you is a large example, and it's a visible example. It's probably also the least valuable example. It's the copper wires, the copper. I don't know what's in a brake drum, but I imagine there's some
To use batteries.
significant
lead.
leads that have some value to them to a scrapper. Do we pay for other Christmas parties out of municipal tax dollars?
No, that's the only one that that's.
So we're paying for Christmas parties using revenue generated from scrap.
I wouldn't call it revenue, John.
Mayor.
Well, it amounts to several $1,000s a year.
To tell you the truth, I don't know what it amounts to. I wasn't here. I have been here in the past, as you
Well, it
well
was
know,
occurring
when
while
the
you were here,
Christmas
too.
party was in December. I wasn't here. But, again, if it has to be accounted for, just like you're saying, no question about it, John.
Okay.
It has to be, and nobody can be taking scrap metal that is garnered from the Public Works Department or any other place in this municipality, taking it and taking it to a scrapyard and not accounting for it with Mike Adams, the superintendent of the Public Works Department. Unquestionably. Now, if we get a few $1,000s in here, and I would not call that revenue, all right? If we get a few $1,000s in here, I don't know what the amount is, to tell you the truth. Let's say $2,000, and council says, yes, as has been traditionally done, a Christmas party for all the employees is done at the Public Works Department, then that's their democratic right, legislative right, to say, now, and if they get feedback, let me
Shouldn't there be an ordinance or some type of legislative action that allows that to occur?
They can pass a motion,
Okay,
all right? They can pass a motion to that
certainly
effect.
can, but I don't believe I've ever seen one of those.
Maybe not.
Okay.
And maybe there should be, and you may have a point. But my point being is that we're talking about it now. I don't think there's anybody trying to hide how that party down there, the Christmas party, is being funded. Now, the previous council, They didn't like that. That was their call. All right, and this is this council, and again, if they don't like it, they can also rescind that, and there's no Christmas party unless everybody pitches in or whatever the case might be.
If I may interrupt, Mr. Johns is correct. That was corrected because last year
It was
you did-
corrected, and it was a total of $1,200 that I had donated.
Okay, so there should be from last year's receipts now for the scrap metal being submitted.
That I don't, I'm sure there are, but.
Oh, I mean, for this year,
Yeah, for this year, I'm sure.
Okay. Because, my understanding was,
If they've taken it down.
I mean, I probably haven't done so
Sometimes
yet.
don't take it down till
well,
later in the year.
I had talked to several people who had firsthand knowledge of it going down there, and that it amounted to, each trip was
I-
several $1,000s.
I do know in the past that there was a drop-off, a box donated by one of the scrap yards, that if it was filled, people would come and throw old washing machines, refrigerators, whatever in it. Once it was filled, they come pick it up, take it down, and they'd pay us.
And who got that money?
I guess, Monroeville, Public Works.
Public Works or Monroeville?
Monroeville. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, so
I'm
somewhere-
just saying I can recall there being a drop-off box.
Okay, so there should be somewhere an income for those. If you're talking about a dumpster that size, it's got to be multiple $1,000s, more than two.
I can't answer.
Okay. Lastly, it was mentioned last week about the the animal control officer, and this fund that pays for the shelter. Does that go through the municipal checking account? Is there an accounting for that, or is that an off-the-books account also?
There are no off-the-books accounts.
Okay.
There is money that is collected, if I'm not mistaken, over at the pet store here by, I think her name is Sue Rizzo, one of the volunteers, and there's a donation, and that money is accounted for by Mr. Adams. All right, and there's receipts and everything for the dog food or whatever the case might be.
So that all
goes
gets
on.
run through the budget process, that gets all run through the annual reports?
I'd have to look into that to see how, but it is accounted for, okay? As far as on a columnar sheet, it's accounted for.
Okay. That's all I had.
Okay.
Thank you.
Once again, ladies